Hello, everyone. Uh, I am Kumar Saurav Singh. I am a partner with banking, restructuring, and insolvency practice at Khaitan & Co. I would like to welcome you all to the second part of our three-series webinar on distress, debt financing, and enforcement. While you may have heard the word unprecedented several times in almost every business conversation in the last few months, but its effect to describe the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic has only gained strength, despite the lockdown getting lifted for most part. This afternoon, we'll be specifically addressing the impact of COVID-19 and the resultant IBC suspension on various stakeholders in the sphere of financing, restructuring, and insolvency. We have been joined by an distinguished panel of speakers to throw light on this very interesting subject. I have the privilege of introducing to my audience the panelists, which includes Mr. Ankit Thakkar. Ankit has joined SC Loi in January 2019 to lead its India team based in Mumbai. Ankit has more than 13 years of experience in distress and restructuring markets in India. Ankit holds creditor and buyer side experience around financially stressed companies and has led committees of creditors in various restructuring situations. He has also participated in multiple lender resolutions through court observed processes, including IBC. Prior to joining SC Loi, Ankit was a director with JM ARC, the second largest ARC in the country. He is a keen observer of government policies on handling stress in financial system and brings extensive knowledge on evolution and trends in the market. We also have with us Mr. Rajiv Ratan. He is the chairman of Ratan India Group. Rajiv has started his career with Schlumberger, one of the largest oil field services in the world. A first generation entrepreneur, he co-founded Indiabulls Group in 2000 as India's first online stock trading firm, which went on to become a large business conglomerate with businesses in consumer finance, securities, real estate, and power generation, with a combined net worth of more than $5 billion. The businesses were and power infrastructure business was rechristened as Ratan India Group under the chairmanship of Mr. Rajiv Ratan. Subsequently, he has also started a renewables power business and developed 306 megawatt of solar power plants, which were subsequently acquired by GIP, which is a private equity fund. Mr. Ratan is also running NBFC in partnership with Lone Star Fund, one of the largest private equity funds from US. We also have with us today Mr. Babu Rao. He is the General Counsel of Bajaj Finance and also a director of Bajaj Financial Securities Limited. He is a senior legal professional with over 24 years of experience in banking, corporate, and other securities related laws. He has worked in several organizations in leading legal roles, including with Citibank, HDFC Bank, Axis Bank, and Unit Trust of India. Besides our esteemed external panelists, we also have Mr. Siddharth Srivastav as one of our panelists today. He is a partner with the banking, finance, and restructuring team as Khaitan. With the round of introductions, I would now invite my partner, Mr. Rajiv Vidhani, to make his keynote address before we start the panel discussion. Rajiv has been a partner with Khaitan & Co. On the insolvency and restructuring side and has been a practitioner in this area for last several years, having been involved in several large insolvency resolution situations. So on that note, I would like to invite Rajiv to make his keynote address, and which will be followed by panel discussion with our panelists. Over to you, Rajiv.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, Saurabh, for the introduction. I will just take a few moments to define how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the Indian economy and the global economy as a whole. The COVID-19 pandemic has created economic disruptions of unparalleled proportions by bringing most business and financial activities to a grinding halt. As per a recent estimate by the IMF, the global GDP is expected to contract by over 3%, as against only 1.7% in 2009 after the 2008 GFC. Thus, businesses and financial institutions are facing truly unprecedented times, domestically as well as globally. What is important is that even before the pandemic started showing its effect on business, India was already dealing with one of its worst slowdowns in over a decade. India's GDP growth has been declining for over 3 consecutive years. And to provide a perspective, India's GDP growth declined from an impressive 8.3% estimate in 2016-17 to a meager 4.2% in 2019-2020. The slowdown pre-COVID could be attributed to a variety of factors, including an industry-wide recession caused due to global economic slump, reduction in domestic consumption in a consumption-based economy, liquidity challenges due to mounting NPAs, the NBFC crisis, and policy decisions like demonetization. The business disruptions caused by COVID across the globe has further deepened India's financial distress across sectors. The two broad set of stakeholders in a loan context, as we could see, are the borrowers and the lenders, and they're both facing their unique set of challenges. For most borrowers, the challenges lies in terms of the contracting demand. The COVID-19 impediment is unique in the sense that it brought complete halt to operations as well as completely curtailed the demand in a lot of sectors. For obvious reasons, these sectors have suffered much more than the others, and these sectors include such as aviation, hospitality, retail, automotive, and real estate, just to mention a few. And as a result of contraction in demand and halt in operations, we have seen the force majeure clauses being tested across the industry. In a loan context, force majeure clauses are either absent or are included in a form which is more suitable for the lenders and allows invocation of event of default and other remedies to accelerate the loan. The aforesaid also leads to breach of various covenants across the loan agreements, including payment and financial testing covenants. As a result, the most prudent businesses are taking all available measures to reduce the overheads in an effort to avoid any default on account of unexpected and immediate liquidity crisis. On the lender's end, while the NPAs are already mounting due to the slowdown in the economic activities even pre-COVID, the pandemic has just catapulted the rise of NPAs, which if or in the absence of the RBI announced moratorium on payments and standstill on asset classification would have put extreme pressure on bank balance sheets. However, unlike banks, NBFC are facing a unique challenge of their own due to the asset liability mismatch, which is happening is because they were not getting the same benefit which they were allowed to provide. They were asked to being provided on the asset side. This hopefully seems to be getting resolved now. However, in addition to the repayment capabilities of the borrowers, which are affected by the liquidity constraints, banks are also now facing an unprecedented challenge in the form of enforcement of security due to the borrower conducive approach, which is now being adopted by the judiciary considering the situation. And I will discuss that in more detail later. Furthermore, while the RBI has taken several liquidity measures for the corporates as well as the NBFCs, where the latter were already suffering since the IL&FS crisis, bankability has been a major challenge on the lending front. I would now quickly move to the next slide and highlight how Indian policymakers have been quick to respond to these challenges. And while the long-term effect is yet to be seen of these changes, the regulator, the RBI, the judiciary, and the legislators have all acted to contain the immediate issues faced by the stakeholders across the debt spectrum. Now, if I talk about the RBI relaxations, RBI in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and recognizing the economic fallout of the pandemic, introduced an initial package after the Honorable RBI Governor's speech on 27 March, and it later issued some supplementary and clarificatory measures on 17 April and 23rd May 2020. Now, these primarily entail the following reliefs. One was a 3-month moratorium, which was announced on all kinds of term loan installments and working capital interest, which includes cash credit and overdraft facilities, which were due between 1st March to 31st May 2020, which is the moratorium period. Now, in view of the lockdown extension on 23rd May, moratorium has again been extended by another 3 months to 31st August 2020, and now there is a moratorium of 6 months, which is a welcome move considering the immediate liquidity challenges faced by a lot of businesses. On the interest front, it was clarified that while the interest may be deferred, it will be required to accumulate during the moratorium period. But considering the pressure which the corporates are facing, now it has been allowed to convert the accumulated interest into FITL on option. However, it will be payable no later than 31st March 2021. The recalculation of drawing power is another relief which has come, and it has been allowed to be permitted to increase until 31st August 2020, with original margins required to be restored by 31st March 2021. RBI has taken a careful step, and it has clarified that the aforesaid relaxations, which in the form of moratorium, which is in the form of deferment, recalculation, conversion of interest into FITL, it will not be treated as a financial difficulty as per RBI June 7 circular, and therefore will not be considered as a restructuring. It became a subject of dispute as to now, one of the aspects was with respect to asset classification. It becomes a subject of dispute that while the initial language of the circular suggested that these benefits would be available for installments on which moratorium was granted during the moratorium period, the judiciary intervened and extended the installments for defaults even prior to the moratorium period. However, the RBI ended the debate later on and clarified that for loan accounts, as long as they are standard as on 29 February 2020, even if overdue, the moratorium period shall be excluded for asset classification. Thus, a standstill was agreed on aging during the moratorium period. Furthermore, under the extant framework, if we refer the June 7 framework, the timeline for review of facilities is generally 30 days, and the implementation is another 180 days from the date of completion of the review period. Now, RBI, in light of the pandemic, has revised the set timelines, and now if the accounts are within the review period of 30 days as on 1st March, the entire period of moratorium from 1st March to 31st August will be excluded for calculation of this timeline. And accounts which are within the 180-day implementation period, that is after the review period, the timeline shall get extended by 180 days. On the real estate side, RBI in February 2020 had allowed banks to extend the DCCO period, and therefore also allow the extension of the repayment schedule by a period of 1 year without treating it as restructuring. And it had allowed the extension of the same by another 1 year by way of restructuring. Now the RBI has decided to extend it to the NBFCs as well. So this is what on the regulatory front. Now, on the judicial front, I would say that there has been a sudden yet seemingly temporary shift in the approach of the judiciary to defaults. The courts have acted more conducive to the request of the borrower in granting reliefs, and some of the important developments which we have seen, but which should be considered unique to the COVID-19 situation, and the courts have also cautioned them to be fact specific, are, for example, on the enforcement side, high courts in the matters like rural fair price and ideal toll, while recognizing the economic fallout and the need for balancing the interests of the parties, has interfered and granted interim relief against enforcement security. And in some cases, they have suggested to even revise the repayment schedules, keeping in mind the lockdown. There are also cases like Delhi High Court case in Anantraj, which, as I discussed, which extended the applicability of the asset classification under the circular to even to defaults prior to that date. But now the RBI clarification has come and clarified that. Thirdly, as a sign of truly unprecedented times, while bank guarantees are instruments which are inherently intended to insulate a beneficiary from the financial difficulties of the counterparty, there are now judgments which recognize COVID-19 as a special equity circumstance, and considering the possibility of an irreparable loss to a party, the courts have now allowed interim stay on invocation of bank guarantees. Now, this was on the enforcement and the funding side. On the IBC front, the courts have been proactive as well, where they have taken suo moto cognizance of the lockdown. The Honorable Supreme Court, while taking suo moto cognizance and the hardship being faced on account of the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulted lockdown, ordered that the limitation period in all proceedings before all courts and tribunals, irrespective of the limitation period prescribed under any general or specific law, shall be extended with effect from 15th March 2020. And the NCLAT, also relying on its powers and the rules which are and the rule 11 of the NCLT rules, read with the judgment Queen Logistics, has also ordered that all ongoing CRPs, whichever they are pending, whether in NCLT or NCLAT, the period of lockdown which is extended in the area of registered office of the corporate debtor shall be excluded for computing the 330-day timeline. So this was on the judicial side, and on the back of the changes which were made of the suo moto cognizance which was taken by the NCLAT and the Supreme Court. On the back of this, the CRP regulations and the liquidation regulations were also amended to exclude the lockdown period, which was announced by the central government, from calculation of timelines under the liquidation of CRP regulations. Furthermore, before the suspension of the IBC was announced, the Indian government had issued a notification under Section 4 with the intent to protect MSMEs from IBC action by substantially increasing the default reward under IBC to INR 1 CR, or I would say 130,000 USD, from a mere 1 lakh or USD 1,300. However, the most awaited move of the government has been on the IBC suspension side, whereby through an ordinance, the following changes have been made. Firstly, A non-obstant provision has been introduced to section 7, 9, and 10, which has been introduced by way of a section 10 of the 10A of the IBC, which provides that any default which occurs from 25th from March until an expiry of 6 months, which is extendable by another year, creditors or corporate applicants will not have a right to trigger a CIRP by filing an application. However, a proviso has also been introduced which says that the defaults which occur during the exemption period, there will be a permanent ban on filing of the application. Now, while suspension has also been introduced in other jurisdictions for similar periods, a permanent ban looks excessive and doesn't correspond to the objective which is set out in the ordinance and addressing the business disruption caused by the COVID-19 and the difficulty in finding an finding the right resolution applicant for a corporate debtor. As regards prior defaults, the ordinance has provided abundant clarity. Thankfully, and there is an explanation which says that it will not apply to defaults which are prior to 25th March 2020. And so therefore, the IBC shall remain very much live during the exemption period for prior defaults. The second important change is the ordinance, which has another non-obstant provision, which has been inserted to section 66 of the IBC, which provides protection to directors against wrongful trading and provides that the RP shall be barred from filing any application under section 66(2) if the application relates to a default during the exemption period. It becomes important to see the impact insolvency will have on the suspension will have on the companies under stress and on the creditors and other stakeholders. As the suspensions bring other recovery and resolution options to the fore, IBC has been duly recognized as an insolvency resolution and not a recovery process. However, suspension of insolvency, while undeniably which has its merits, it leaves limited options for creditors and debt traders, as the efficacy of other options have always been a challenge and India's litigation remedy has always been prolonged. I would now request Kumar Saurabh Singh, who will take us to our esteemed panelist, to probably discuss this aspect as to how this is going to shape the Indian credit market.
Thanks, Rajiv, for that very helpful background of the various policy, judicial, and legislative response to this whole crisis situation. And that really sets the tone for the discussion this afternoon. As we begin this discussion in the context of the background that Rajiv Vidhani has given, I would like to first come to you, Ankit. You have been a very active player in the distressed debt side from a lender perspective. How do you see the impact of a suspension of IBC, both as a short-term as well as long-term impact of suspension of IBC on the overall distress resolution?
First of all, thanks, Saurabh, for the kind introduction. I think in the near term, given the overall environment, the suspension of IBC should help, the deal-making environment for the borrower as well as lender in a positive way. I think in last 3-4 years, since the IBC has become operational, each of the stakeholders, that the promoters, investors, even the operational creditors, have understood how much they can lever the threat of referring a borrower to IBC, right? I think there are enough data points now available where stakeholders are much more educated in terms of what IBC process will get them, right? They know what kind of litigations they will face, so the recovery period can be extended. What kind of competitive intensity, in terms of mergers and acquisition an IBC process can generate. And then there are sector-specific issues that plague resolution, right? So like an EPC, how it will behave, residential buyers, how it will affect the real estate resolution, firms resolution. So basically, more or less all the investors and the lender, borrower, everybody knows what is the kind of discount or premium they will get by way of getting into IBC. So given this background, I think suspension would definitely be an enabler for borrower as well as lender to come to table and create a win-win deal. Well, I would like to believe that discussion on OTS should pick up in next 6 months to 1 year then. That's in near term, right? But we shouldn't forget that these negotiations and diligence have tendency to drag painfully longer than 6 months, and hence deals may conclude only later. So, well, definitely positive in near term. In terms of long term, I think the foreign investors the biggest draw for them to come and invest in India was introduction of IBC in India, right? So given that we have again suspended this IBC for 6 months or say 1 year, it definitely breeds uncertainty into the minds of investor, and so that's actually a negative, and they will always consider that aspect before investing. Well, earlier government has tried to address this uncertainty, especially in SR case, which was a big positive, right? So other than this, I can't foresee any long-term impact of suspension. India is unique in that sense that they have suspended IBC. Rest all, at least the developed countries, have kind of continued with their process, IBC or resolution process or framework. Yeah.
Thanks, Ankit, for your opening comments. I would not now like to come to Mr. Rajiv Ratan. Rajiv, you have, of course, have the unique distinction of being both a borrower as well as lender, but you have successfully closed one of India's largest pre-IBC deal, and probably, if I may say so, the only pre-IBC deal with the continuation of the erstwhile promoter large distressed funds who have reposed confidence in you. Having done that, and in today's situation, how do you see that experience, and what challenges did you face in consummating that deal? Rajiv, we are not able to hear you very well.
Mr. Rajiv Ratan, you need to unmute
Can you hear
yourself,
me now?
please.
Sorry, I think I was on mute.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was on mute. Thanks for the generous introduction, Saurabh, and thanks for calling me here. While closing our deal on the Amravati power plant, we had almost 13 banks on the other side, which were all government owned, and our entire journey took almost 15 months. And along the way, there were huge negotiations. We had a failed deal after 6 months, and then we renegotiated it and pulled it up. In our deal, I would say all the banks took it upon themselves as a challenge that they wanted to demonstrate that deals outside IBC can happen. Probably in our case, everybody felt that it was a win-win solution for all, so that was the key driver. But having said that, navigating the deal terms through each bank and to bring them all on the same page, and on the other side to bring the incoming foreign investors to agree to that. So it was a humongous challenge, and every few weeks there were circumstances and when we would feel that the deal is dead, and then we have to again revive it, and then you keep working at it. So in a nutshell, I would say, while it was very difficult, but that also demonstrates that Indian banking system is open to doing such deals. So this is a huge positive. They are open to doing deals in a tough sector like thermal power sector. So that is the other message. In our case, all the big lenders, PFC and SBI, both of them were absolutely very, very helpful, and they were championing the deal. So that I would say is the key takeaway, that one should not really think that Indian banking system cannot really rise up to a challenge and do a deal. So that is the key thing to take away from that.
Clearly, so it's very clear that Indian's banking system has really been able to deliver to resolution requests in pre-insolvency situation, and that's an experience which will probably come in very handy in today's times. I would now like to turn to Mr. Babu Rao. Babu, I would want to understand from you while we are discussing about suspension of insolvency and overall distress. You come from an industry which has been reeling under the pressure for some time, NBFC as a sector. At the same time, you represent a stakeholder in that sector who has been doing exceptionally well. Now, how do you see the NBFC industry both as a borrower as well as lender dealing with distress in the market and overall turmoil that we see in the NBFC sector today, the liquidity issues that it is facing? How do you see the effect of COVID on that overall problem the sector has been reeling under?
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Saurav, for the generous introduction. I just want to say, see, good afternoon, everybody on the call also. See, generally speaking, well-managed NBFCs with sufficient, liquidity cover over a period of time have absorbed most of the shocks, earlier shocks also, like such as ILFS issue or demonetization, etc. Right? And COVID is an unprecedented event at this stage for itself, right? NBFCs which may not have adequate foresight on the liquidity management and asset liability management, they are definitely facing the issues, is my personal view. And RBI, on the third point, actually, RBI has taken various relief measures in the context of the COVID. It would be important that the economic activity should come back to the normalcy at the earliest. If it is not coming, then definitely this, this would continue for a long time. Otherwise, see, the thing is, as a borrower, we never faced any problem because we had actually, fortunately, I think we had the ALM process in the company for over a period of time. So we did not have faced any problem of that sort. And as a lender, every lender has to face the current scenario because of the moratorium, because of the issues, etc. And sudden, stoppage of this thing, sudden lockdown and sudden stoppage of the business, everything. Entire thing came to a grinding halt. That is an issue I think which has caused, but hopefully now the country is opened up, things are happening, so it will definitely, I think, come back to normalcy soon.
Thanks, Babu. Coming to Siddharth. Siddharth, while we are hearing a lot about the feedback on suspension on insolvency regime and its effect on the economy and the investor interest, Ankit briefly touched upon the steps taken in other jurisdictions by policymakers. If you were to compare what has been done in India by the regulator or the policymakers vis-a-vis what has happened in other parts of the world, how do you see that comparison?
Sure. Thanks, Saurabh, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be interacting with all of you. So in terms of, so my reaction is that the view is that reaction to economic slowdown should not only be looked at from the prism of suspension of insolvency, as Ankit has already said. Yes, there are some countries who have suspended their insolvency laws, while some others have actually amended or imposed significant restrictions on their insolvency laws. So it's not that everybody has gone ahead and suspended it. I mean, just to give you some examples, countries like Australia, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Turkey have suspended a lender's right to initiate insolvency proceedings for default occurring between a particular period for a certain period, which could be the lockdown period. There are other countries who have not suspended but have imposed restrictions on creditors' rights to initiate insolvency. These restrictions include increasing monetary thresholds for initiating insolvency, extending statutory period to respond to written demands like what has happened in Australia. In some jurisdictions like Singapore, debtors have the option of applying for moratorium, protecting them from legal actions, including initiation of insolvency. Just to take an example of UK. So for instance, UK has not suspended insolvency. However, they have temporarily suspended provisions relating to liability for wrongful trading, which India has also done. New Zealand has followed suit. Also, in many jurisdictions, if you talk about India as well, interim financing to corporate debtors is given priority over dues of other creditors, while it is pari passu with CRP costs. United States has actually not suspended its insolvency regime, but has allowed lenders to go beyond this and give them a super priority status to all the lenders who are providing interim finance, and the repayment to lenders providing interim finance will be over and above this ERP cost as well. So that's another example of how United States has dealt with its insolvency laws. In some countries, promoter loans or related party loans are subordinated in insolvency proceedings. For example, in Latin America, because of COVID, some countries like Italy have decided to suspend this subordination in order to encourage new financing, even if it is from promoters. If I can just take the example of, say, for instance, France, it has imposed some form of moratorium against legal actions or termination of contracts outside insolvency proceedings. A lot of other countries, like, for instance, China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, there's a lot of push for pre-IBC workouts as well. The regulators in these countries have actually encouraged out-of-court settlements, and also they're granting deferments in loan repayments. So short point is that not every country has gone about suspending its insolvency regime. A lot of countries have given a push for pre-IBC restructuring. A lot of countries have imposed significant restrictions also, but it all depends on the particular economic situation of the country. And this is a short spiel on what other jurisdictions have done.
Thanks, Siddharth. Now, it clearly appears that we are not unique in our response to the pandemic situation, and other jurisdictions have also looked at this problem and tried to address it in their own way. Now, Ankit, taking forward from your earlier comment regarding the effect of suspension, do you see this as, while you see this as something which is welcome, do you see more foreign investors, distressed funds coming and participating in the distress opportunity that we have in India today? Do you see more deals like what Mr. Ratan did in Ratan India last year, more deals of that sort happening? How do you see this trend developing on resolution?
No, I think clearly in last 2 years, we have definitely noticed a significant jump in interest in special situations. So like Ratan India kind of deals in stressed debt segment in India, right? So some of the very large funds have set up teams in India and they've started deploying capital. So in the long term, I think certainly I believe that pre-pack or OTS funding type of resolution will gather steam. In that sense, yeah, foreign investors would continue to engage with the promoters to resolve stress through suspension period. Having said that, of course, last 2 months, that is during the lockdown period, there was a complete freeze in activities from pure play financial investors. The slowdown was more to assess the damage of the lockdown, that will cause to sustainable cash flows. So also, I think a lot of investment opportunity had emerged in other markets, and investors, focused on those situations where it provided better yield, and the jurisdiction also was more friendly, right? So Singapore, Australia, all such things. Yeah, so I think overall, no, the good thing is that due diligence has now again resumed, is what we understand in some of these transactions, and definitely, I think we'll see a lot more OTS funding kind of deals in the forthcoming future.
Thanks, Ankit. Mr. Ratan, coming to you, as you have experienced with the Ratan India deal, the challenges in doing a pre-insolvency resolution, do you see the blanket suspension was really the way forward for us as far as the insolvency regime was concerned, or we should have it should have been in the way that it is currently there, where we have a 25th March cutoff, and cases pre-25th March can go into insolvency. How do you see this bifurcation and the overall approach around resolution with this kind of a deadline?
On pre-IBC, the challenges which one faces are, especially if it's not a complete OTS, if there is some amount of debt left with the lender, then you need ratings from 2 rating agencies. So that is a big challenge, which I think should have been simultaneously addressed. The other thing is that today, all said and done, every bank has a valuation process which could be very, very convoluted, whether it's a Swiss challenge or whether it is an open bid, they call for. So that you can do in big projects, but when you're dealing with the 10 cases of 200, 300, 400 crores, and so one needs to be able to provide the bank the full flexibility. On paper, the flexibility is there because June 7 circular provides that, but there is that fear in the banking sector that I need to be arriving at a valuation in a very, very transparent way. So while suspension, the 6 months here and there does not move the needle too much, but still the view amongst lenders is that IBC is a sort of a blessed process from courts. So that is the best process for us. Personally, when you are taking a personal view of the person sitting in the seat there, for him, he thinks that he will have no personal liabilities whatsoever if we send this case to IBC. So similarly, if we could have a blessing agency for a pre-IBC solution, that would really, I think, trigger a lot of deal making pre-IBC. That should also have been done while suspending IBC. Other issue that I feel is that this while 29A, again, I could be corrected by your colleagues here, but I understand that in rest of the world, this sort of section does not exist, where promoters are barred. And typically, a promoter being in the race for to sort of regain control of his company always would give better value to the lenders. So on one side, we have allowed MSMEs where 29A is not applicable. So this they are able to take part in the IBC process. On the other side, the same logic should hold true for a slightly maybe larger project as well. We started from a case where there was no IBC, and I think there are umpteen examples that enough people are in jail today for economic crimes. So the way of working in the country has fundamentally changed for people. So I think it is time to relook at that. Because IBC, if the concept was to give a resolution for a stressed asset, then it should be focused on that rather than thinking of we have to punish this guy or we have to do something. So we should not lose focus. We should use it as a resolution tool. It should be available to all, just as it is available to all in the rest of the world. And of course, if there's a crime, then it has to be the person should be punished for sure. But I think on one side we have stopped IBC, but have not really provided a framework for pre-IBC deals. So what I see a challenge coming up is that today entire banking sector will be stuck with these stressed assets and not knowing what to do because they can't go to IBC, and pre-IBC there is this reluctance around whether you'll be hauled up under whatever Prevention of Corruption Act or so both the things have to be looked at very holistically. These are my thoughts on this.
So you make a very interesting point, Raj, regarding the fact that IBC has been perceived in some quarters at least to be a instrument to also punish people, and that mindset eventually we have to come out of it. It has to be seen more as a resolution tool, rather than a instrument of punishment. Coming to you, Babu, in this context of distress and the overall regime being still subject to interpretation, and with a 25th March timeline for insolvency kicking in and subsequent cases insolvency not kicking in for next 6 months, how do you see the lending market evolving during this period? How do you say take decision to lend? Do you see lenders will be more active during this period, or you expect them to be more watchful and see how things unfold?
Thanks, Saurabh. I think yes, you are right. It is actually lenders could be more watchful. But having said that, for the existing NBFCs like us, the penetration of business through digital means is an opportunity, right? Which as a company we are following that, and most of the NBFCs also will be following that. With reference to foreign investment in Indian market, it's a welcome move, as it may this thing augur the stability of the NBFCs in India, which may look forward for such a support. At this point of time, in my view, it is a stability of the NBFCs is far more important than the expansion is my point of view. And lastly, that the entry of the foreign funds would be a good opportunity for NBFCs to exit their positions. Overall competition is always welcome, right? So it is actually competitive environment is always welcome. Lenders, I think most banks and NBFCs see that it is actually, of course, they are cautious in their approach. For example, let's say most of the lenders now looking for only secured sort of a lending, rather unsecured and whatever they wanted to lend earlier, pre-COVID scenario. Now they are more conscious of getting back their money. That is, I think, their motto. And with that cautious approach, I think they are moving ahead.
Thanks, Babu. Coming to you, while we are looking at the response, policy response, and how stakeholders are looking at new cases of distress and how best to deal with it, what about the existing cases which are in insolvency? You represent a lot of administrators and committee of creditors in this process. How do you see the response of the lockdown on the overall resolution processes which are currently ongoing, where bids may have come, or bids are still in negotiation, binding bids not being there with the committee of creditors? How do you see these processes moving forward?
Oh, thanks, Saurabh. So let me just give you a sense of what is generally happening in existing IBC mandates. First of all, before we come to the bidder, it's important to understand, and I'm just speaking from experience acting for RP and COC. During this COVID period, the existing IBC deals, there has been a lot of uptick in the CRP cost. And one of the main reasons why there has been an uptick in CRP cost is elongation of the time period of CIRP. I mean, as Rajiv had also initially in his presentation mentioned that there has been an amendment where lockdown period has been excluded from counting the CRP period. So, which is of course, which has the consequence of elongation of CRP period, which has in turn increased the CRP cost. So lenders are generally concerned about that cost. Secondly, and a more practical issue which a lot of lenders will understand is change of IRP to RP. So if any application has been filed by, say, an operational creditors who has put his person as an interim resolution professional, and the existing set of secured financial creditors have asked for a change of that IRP to RP, a number of those applications are pending before the court. So in the interim, because the court is not fully functioning yet, those change of RP is not possible as of now, and which is the lenders will have to do with an IRP who they are not very happy with, or who may be hand in glove with an operational creditor. So that's another problem which a lot of existing lenders are facing in existing IBC process. Of course, the most important issue which you've already highlighted in your question is resolution applicants renegotiating the plan, citing force majeure and MA. This is of course one of the biggest issue which a lot of COC and resolution professionals are facing right now. And you can't blame anyone in this situation, because even the resolution applicants have a valid concern. So they are citing force majeure, or if they have a material adverse effect clause in their bidding documents or their bid, they are trying to sort of either renege or trying to renegotiate the commercials with the COCs. That's another problem. One more point I generally wanted to highlight from experience is with respect to valuation. Now, valuation is generally done by the valuers taking the value of the assets as on insolvency commencement date. Lenders in some cases, from my experience, are asking the valuation to be done on the current date, since the assets have now deteriorated, because of which the valuation report may not give a clearer picture. Now, just speaking from a legal perspective, I am not sure whether such valuation can be done on the current date, since code links the fair value and liquidation value to insolvency commencement date. But maybe since the concern of the lenders is genuine, maybe it's a good idea to make a representation to IBBI in this regard, that can we sort of take the valuation as on current date instead of the ICD date. So that's another problem which a lot of lenders are facing, or in terms of the process. Also, since revenues have dried up, especially in a lot of real estate insolvency, which I'm dealing with, which is a lot of tenants are asking for discounts or they're not paying up, so which is causing some bit of concern in terms of running the process as such. So the crux of the matter is there are certain key watch out conditions for lenders in context of IBC process. When I am advising the lenders, I'm always telling them watch out for MAC or FM clauses in the resolution plan, because they will have a direct impact, especially in a COVID-19 like scenario. Do not delay in change of the IRP. That's also one of the biggest learning. If you're not happy with the IRP, make sure you file an application immediately and change. Also, do not. A lot of lenders tend to sort of delay the approval of the resolution plan as such. So no unnecessary extension of CR period. If you have a resolution plan, vote for it. Don't 330 is not the new 180. Everybody seems to be taking 330 as a rule, so that should not be, and that's one of the biggest learning. Closure of the deal and filing cases with the NCLT as soon as possible. This is what a lot of lenders have realized, and few key takeaways from the COVID-19 experience.
Thanks, Siddharth. I think very clear the uncertainty in insolvency process is coming to the fore, and a lot of it is going in the direction of judicial intervention. And it remains to be seen if there can be a policy response even on that side to address the situation. I would like to bring in Rajiv Vidhani into the discussion. Rajiv, you touched upon the entire background of various measures that has been taken by government and regulators. Your quick comments on what is expected post the next moratorium ending in August. Do you see any further changes from RBI, anything which can help resolution of insolvencies better now that we have a very clear position on suspension of the regime for next 6 months? Rajiv, you are on mute.
Yeah, sorry. As we have all discussed, that insolvency suspension of a regime which is a resolution regime what it has done is that while it is necessary and it gives the necessary benefit, and I always say that we are 2 steps forward and only 1 step back when we suspend it, it also brings to the fore the other options which are available with the borrowers as of today, which have already been discussed, like the one-time restructuring, or which is currently being provided for the MSMEs, the June 7 restructuring, which is available under the 7 June circular, the Section 230 scheme, which also allows a process similar to a court-approved process. However, it does not provide the benefit of a moratorium, and there are other recourses available to the lenders. But I think now that we are at a stage where cash flows have become a major issue for most borrowers and most businesses, I think, as the panel has also discussed, there is a requirement, and the promoters would also realize that there is a need for a deep restructuring right now. And I think, similarly, like how a one-time restructuring was allowed for MSMEs and which was extended to December, I think similarly, this may be something which may be extended to other borrowers also, because it will allow them to not go through the constraints of the 7 June circular in terms of having the requirement of changing the promoter, or or curing all defaults within a 180-day timeline. Maybe do a one-time restructuring without changing the asset classification downgrade, and therefore allowing them to restructure, because cash flow is going to be an issue which will be spread across the sectors, because all sectors have faced the demand constraint. So I think that is something which may be helpful and which may be sought from RBI.
Thanks, Rajiv. Moving on, coming to you, Ankit, while we are seeing what is happening currently and the availability of pre-insolvency regime in the form that it is currently available, as a foreign investor, what would you like to see in terms of next steps, in terms of further strengthening the pre-insolvency resolution regime? And what would be your expectation from the system, as someone who has capital to put into the system and is looking at opportunities in India?
Well, I think in terms of pre-IBC, The pre-package is still looks like it's still far away, while we did hear and we all get excited with pre-packages. Looks like it's still far away. But in the interim, even if what government or RBI, got recommendation from its task force in terms of improving the debt capital market participation, if that also kicks in, I think in next 1 or 2 years that should be a very good enabler for banks to settle the loans. Because while I completely agree with Rajiv where he mentioned, right, that CVCs and all those kind of things are a big consideration. So non-commercial considerations are actually much bigger for banks to take a view on settlement. But given situations, right, where banks need capital and there is a suspension of IBC for 6 months to 1 year, my belief is that more and more banks, and of course you also have to remember that there's some consolidation which has happened in banks, right? So all these factors, my sense is, would prompt banks to enter into many more pre-packages before pre-package resolution comes into its avatar. So well, in the interim, I believe that if the whatever recommendations the task force have given in improving the debt capital market in India, if that is introduced, it should be a great booster for everyone, all the participants. Yeah.
So on the supply side issues, very clearly, I think there is a need for clear relaxation and improvement in regime. On the resolution side, Mr. Rajiv Ratan, coming to you, do you think with this suspension of IBC and the overall 29A construct possibly not being there in pre-insolvency, or at least ought not to be there, that could be another argument. Do you see it will give a chance to other promoters, other borrowers to find a resolution outside insolvency, or you see that it's only a very temporary step and 6 months may not be sufficient if one were to look at resolution considering your past experience?
Yeah, so I again go back to my earlier point where I say that just like IBC provides institutional framework and gives kind of immunity to the lenders for issues of how much haircut is being taken, or it's a value discovery through a judicial process. So until that is not given in pre-IBC, I see a huge reluctance and huge pileup of these cases. I mean, we are sitting at 10 lakh crores in terms of NPAs, and look at how much is resolved till now. And this number will only go up. And while one-time restructuring is something that is not a permanent solution. Let's say some business is genuinely and badly affected and needs to be shut down. So what happens there? You have banned IBC for life for this period, but we know that our lives are not going to be same. The restaurant traffic, or people involved in travel industry, or people involved in who owns hotels and resorts, if they are shut down for 2 years or 1 year, the company goes bankrupt. But you can't take it to IBC. So what do you do with it? I mean, banks will be just sitting there, and there may be genuinely no buyers of such an asset for some time. So we have to look at the whole issue very, very holistically, rather than just thinking that, oh, IBC was a sort of punishing tool, so let's stop the punishment for 6 months. So we have to have our eyes and ears open to the macro situation which is emerging. There are different numbers or projections on how much our NPAs will increase by. So we have to have a strategy to be able to extract maximum money out of that. And I clearly feel that if you have promoter on your side, then you will be able to extract maximum money. Fine, you put him in jail if he has done something wrong. I'm not saying that you don't do that. Please go ahead and do that. But having him participate in the process will give you maximum value. That's what I feel.
Thanks, Rajiv. Coming to you, Babu, with pre-insolvency regime being a real option, at the same time, with all these uncertainties around, say, resolving, do you see new lending and new, say, products really taking shape? We have seen RBI announcing some draft guidelines on securitization, sale of loans. Ultimately, all this has to tie up with resolution. And in a resolution situation, do you see that with the current pre-insolvency regime which we have here in India currently, there being a incentive for people to do more lending, both on the domestic side and international side? Do you see if your not so strong peers in the industry being able to find Ankit or any other investor who will be willing to step in and take over their exposure and give them exit?
While Thanks, Saurabh. While I agree with the views of the panelists, what happens is that, see, we were having a pre-IBC also, we were having all the resolution plans, right? It's not that resolution was not there earlier, etc., etc. Lenders may be resorting to those things in the current, this thing, stoppage of the IBC, etc., for the time being, temporary suspension. Then, as far as the RBI guidelines on this thing, securitization, etc., is there, it would be too early to comment upon that. But it's noticed that one of the aspects I think that is contemplated in the draft guidelines is the definition of the securitization has been modified to allow the single asset securitizations. So that I think securitization of exposures purchased from other lenders has been also allowed. These are the welcome moves, I think, if at all, as and when the draft guidelines are going to be finalized and implemented, that would help. On the with regard to the sale of the again NPS or sale of the stressed assets, etc. Apart from the standard assets, stressed assets also have been proposed to be permitted now in the new guidelines for the assignment as well as the innovation. And the requirement of minimum retention is also proposed to be done away with. That is one more welcome move, so that you will not be waiting for a long time to exhaust your remedy, etc., etc. Then the price discovery process is also proposed to be deregulated and could be worked upon as per the lender's board approved policies. So that is also another thing. These are the indeed welcome steps, as it helps to improve the liquidity position. And the last point is that unlike the current situation where the stressed assets are only to be sold to the ARCs, now it is proposed that the stressed assets may be sold to any entity that is permitted to take on loan exposures by its statutory and regulatory framework. This is also another important thing, as far as I think both the sides they are trying to address, but RBI may take its own time to sort of finalize those guidelines and issue the fresh guidelines. And once it is finalized, we need to see the final print on that. So it is a welcome move, according to me.
While RBI takes its time to say come forward with more clarity on some of these very critical aspects for resolution, Siddharth, coming to you, how do you see some of the other options while the contractual mechanism is all that has been resorted to far in pre-insolvency resolutions, and what Mr. Rajiv Ratan was mentioning, that there is no statutory framework like IBC, and that in some ways is useful. It has its own merits. How do you see a Section 230 Companies Act process of compromise and compare it with the insolvency and other options that may be available with creditors during this period, and how can those be used, and how do you see the benefits vis-a-vis the insolvency regime?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in terms of 230, I would say that it should be used more often, and why not? Perhaps this is a time when Section 230 can be put to use effectively. 230, to my mind, has effectively been used in context of, say, mergers, amalgamations, demergers. However, its use in debt restructuring has been extremely limited. When the section itself envisages debt restructuring, then why shouldn't it be used? Now, I mean, yes, I agree. It does deviate from IBC by going back to the earlier regime, which is called the debtor in possession. However, this, in my view, may facilitate ease of negotiations between creditors and bona fide promoters, and they have unparalleled knowledge of their business. So it does possess its risk associated with a debtor in possession structure, but having the existing promoter by your side in terms of rehabilitating a company is something which can definitely be explored. Also, 230 does not make watertight distinctions between a financial creditor or an operational creditor, which in my view benefits the entire settlement process by actually assuaging concerns about unequitable treatment of the interstate creditors. It is also not intended to be adversarial. The NCLT under section 230 power can be excised very, very quickly and swiftly, and the collective wisdom of COC can be replaced by collective wisdom of all the creditors, in my view. So there's no reason why it shouldn't be used. Couple of concerns which I think certain stakeholders and lenders may have with respect to 230, that it does not provide for a moratorium. So there's a possibility of disruption of the entire process. It can't be ruled out. Also, just one bottleneck which I feel which may be stopping a lot of stakeholders from resorting to 230 is that the threshold of 75% of secured creditors have to sort of agree to effectuate a scheme of corporate debt restructuring. That's something which I personally feel is a big bottleneck. But all in all, it's an option which is worth exploring. And unless it is used in abundance, nobody would actually see what the practical problem is. And certain, representation can also be made with respect to sort of lowering down the threshold, or at least it should be tried by more often by the lenders, in my view, especially in the current scenario of IBC suspension.
Thanks, Siddharth. With that, I would want to come to Rajiv Vidhani for another option which is debated quite a lot today in the wake of suspension of insolvency. How do you see SARFAESI, DRT, other options which used to be resorted to by lenders in the pre-insolvency era? Suddenly they have come back into discussion. Do you see their relevance in today's situation and complexity of market that they would be able to effectively give results, or what would be your take on that?
I think that's a good question. So as far as SARFAESI is concerned, there are by SARFAESI, when it was introduced, I think the legislator had their heart in the right place while at the time of introducing it, and it was introduced with the same zest as the IBC has been introduced. However, there are a lot of challenges which SARFAESI has faced in the which has faced in the last 20 years or so, and I don't think the experience of the lenders with SARFAESI has been that smooth as compared to IBC. And the couple of challenges: one, that SARFAESI has been used as an enforcement regime rather than a resolution regime. However, while IBC allows you an undertaking level resolution which allows the company to continue, SARFAESI is more a resolution which is an asset level resolution where you're able to sell the asset, you're able to make the recovery, but there is no undertaking level resolution which is possible through SARFAESI. Another challenge which I say is the timeline itself with SARFAESI. While the timelines which have been provided under SARFAESI are very strict, and that is where I made the comparison between SARFAESI and IBC. Those timelines have never been adhered to. The average timeline which we see even at DRT level or at SARFAESI level is much longer than an IBC process. And the other challenge is that it's a very exclusive process. It only allows a certain set of lenders to take benefit of SARFAESI. And let's say today debt participants, like for example the AIFs for that matter, for that matter, or or other creditors in the market, they do not have access to SARFAESI, because it still will be restricted to only banks, certain financial institutions, and NBFCs for that matter. So I think that restricted access is another issue per se. And we can make probably AIFs more more participative in this credit process if we give them access to SARFAESI. So I think there are the inherent challenges which are built into SARFAESI, but I think with certain improvements it can definitely be of use, especially because now IBC is suspended, at least for the exemption period defaults. So I think it may be used as a recourse, but these challenges need to be addressed.
Thanks, Rajiv. I think we are running short of time here. It's developing as a very interesting debate, the entire credit scenario in the country with the suspension of IBC. At the same time, as Mr. Rajiv Ratan was mentioning, you needed this regime more than ever before because you have more distress. You have nearly 10 lakh crores of distress. and you have a which can deal with the problem being suspended. Well, on that note, gentlemen, all our external panelists, I would request you for your one last comment, starting from Ankit to Rajiv and then to Mr. Babu Rao. How do you see us coming out of this problem as a country, and at the same time being able to retain interest of foreign investors, because we really, as a growing economy, would need that large debt capital to flow in the country, and how do you see this temporary slowdown and the COVID setback playing its role in the flow of credit into the country?
Yeah, so my view is that I think there's enough value in the businesses. It's only the temporary liquidity crunch in NBFC, mutual funds, credit funds, and all those things that we are facing. Definitely, I think we can come out of it. It's moment the engine starts again. So I think I'm pretty optimistic about that.
Thanks,
I do
Ankit.
share the, sorry. I do share the same thoughts actually, Saurabh. See, the thing is that see, a lot of things are happening from regulator, government side, everywhere, right? We should be optimistic rather than a pessimistic approach. And certain things, of course, there are certain things which have gone bad, etc., etc. For example, one of the things I can say is that a recent ILFS type of a process outside the IBC, which was totally that type of it is not an answer to that. That type of thing should be avoided, because it creates a lot of uncertainty among the lenders, among the investors, everybody, right? That is I think one of the classic case I can highlight actually recently, where we are also part of the one of the lenders there. And otherwise, see, on a positive note, every other things, other aspects, I think everybody is trying to address the issue rather than being pessimistic, be it regulator, be it government, and be it the public, right, at large. So hopefully, I think everything will turn back and we'll bounce back.
Coming to you, Mr. Ratan.
See, we are all optimists, and that's why we are discussing solutions here. So I'm absolutely optimistic about the country. I'm absolutely optimistic about human race overcoming this challenge of COVID. Absolutely, as Ankit said, there is a huge value sitting there, but at the same time, since stress is around, so both lenders as well as borrowers have to be extremely careful and watchful on how to navigate through the process. Along the way, of course, there'll be huge opportunities of deals both for promoters and lenders and foreign funds to come in and deploy good amounts of capital and make returns. So it's going to be interesting, but at the same time, because world is going to be different post-COVID, so certain businesses might be getting some impact permanently. So that is what one has to really watch out for. But I think we are on the right track with the changes which have been coming there. The spirit is to make things better, so that gives us all hope that all the issues that we discussed today will get some solutions in near future. Thank you.
Any last comments from Siddharth and Dhani?
No, so I completely agree. I'm also very optimistic, and just on the parting note, I think because of suspension of IBC, there would be a lot of pre-IBC restructuring which will happen for sure, as other co-panelists have said. But at the same time, because of the suspension of IBC, it would give a lot of time to NCLT to sort out and adjudicate on the existing pending cases. So we will see a mix of pre-IBC as well as IBC cases, which will be sort of resolved through the normal NCLT structure. So it would be a mix of these two things, which is overall a pretty good thing for the overall economy and the stakeholders.
Rajiv?
Yeah, I mean, Siddharth has very well pointed out that IBC is very much alive, and there is a huge pendency of cases which are there. I think Mr. Anurag Thakur had recognized that there are almost 10,000 cases which are already pending, with some 2,000 CIRPs pending in the pending before which were in the hands of the resolution professionals. I think this is a good time to use that opportunity and probably resolve these cases, and improve the NCLT infrastructure also in the meanwhile. So probably, we are better equipped to deal with these cases, because this problem is just been in some cases where it has just been shifted, by some time. So I think we can utilize this time well. Second, I think this is also a good opportunity, as mentioned, that there's a good time to start to rethink our whole approach towards the promoters. While, as Mr. Rajiv Ratan rightly pointed out, that you very well punish the promoter who siphoned off funds, or where there is any kind of funds which have been taken out, and your RBI circulars always covered that. I think maybe 29A can be also revisited in a way that when you come back to IBC after a year, maybe we can allow the good promoters to also continue with their businesses and use the IBC more effectively, which will improve the valuations for the lenders also. I think these are the 2 points I just wanted to highlight.
Saurabh, you're on mute.
Well, on that optimistic note, and taking from the, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yes. So on that note, on that optimistic note, and treating this crisis as an opportunity, as really the sentiment which has come out of this panel, I think it's a very good say opportunity for India to reassess where we stand, and really chart out a clear path. I think that's the sentiment that I am hearing from all of you as panelists, and I would like to thank profusely each of the panelists, our external panelists, for giving us time today, and we hope to continue this dialogue. As part of this series, our next session is scheduled for next Tuesday, and I would also like to thank all the attendees for attending the session today, and would invite all of you for the next session in that series. And on that note, I would like to conclude this session, and thanks once again to each one of you for participating and attending in this session.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.